All right. Well, it is 11 a.m. here on the west coast of the U.S., and so I'm going to get started. I know that we'll have people who are joining in as they come from their last meetings, and my colleague Jamie Kreis, who's here today to help, will let them in as they come. So welcome to week 3 of our Mentoring Month series. Week 1, we talked about, from the mentee's perspective, how to find a mentor. Last week, week 2, we talked about what a mentor can do to improve their mentoring. And today, we are going to do a touch and a taste on making the most of your mentoring relationship. As always, this is a session for you. And so I hope that you'll engage, ask questions, engage in the chat. We'll have a little time at the end for questions, hopefully. And speaking of questions, next week is all about questions. It's going to be a brown bag. It's going to be an hour long, starting at the same time. So join us next week to with your questions, with your Q&A, and we can talk about all things mentoring. This is already, I know, just from the faces and the names with which I'm familiar, or with whom I'm familiar, this is an engaged group that's got a lot of wisdom and experience. So really looking forward to that as well. So without further ado, let's dig in. And I want to introduce you, if you've not seen this before, and reintroduce you, if you have seen it before, to our mentoring cycle that we use at Center for Mentoring Excellence. There are 4 predictable phases of the mentoring relationship. The preparation phase, which is about getting yourself and the relationship ready to dive in deeper to build some trust. There is the negotiation phase, which is about setting agreements. There's the enabling growth phase, which is about learning. That is the goal-getting phase. And then there's coming to closure, which is about looking back and moving forward on your mentoring relationship. So why do I raise this now? Because as you're looking to get the most out of your mentoring relationship, you will want to pay attention to each of these phases. And today we're going to start talking about the negotiating phase. Now, this term negotiation is something that sometimes I get some pushback on because people feel like it sounds awfully formal. It sounds awfully structured. And I'm sort of an informal kind of guy or an informal kind of gal. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of the negotiating phase, even in informal relationships, because you really want to set the stage for the co-creation of a beneficial relationship where you really can have this kind of reciprocity. You can have the trust building. You can have the foundation setting so that you can begin to go deep and have a meaningful relationship. Hi, Sharon. Nice to see you. So let's talk a little bit about that negotiation phase. That's where you're setting the agreements in your mentoring relationship. I know some of you are going to be so tempted to skip this because you're going to feel like it doesn't apply. I just have a kind of drive-by mentoring relationship where someone comes and asks me for my advice on a one-off basis, or we never really talked about it being a mentoring relationship. So I want to challenge you to take the time and set agreements. Here's some advice that people who have participated in mentoring programs that where we have facilitated have given to you, either prospective or current mentors and mentees, about agreements and what's worked. And in a minute, we'll talk about what some of those agreements are. Honor your appointments with your mentoring partner. Identify the times in advance when you know you won't be able to connect. That's boundary setting, right? Be realistic in terms of the time you give to the program. Use your mentoring as an opportunity to move beyond current challenges. We talked before in some of our prior sessions about the fact that mentoring is a developmental relationship that allows you to move beyond just your performance into exposure and image, exposure to resources, people, and opportunities, and your image in the organization. So focusing on that day-to-day challenge, the day-to-day challenges will stand in the way of you really focusing on your goals. It's not that you can't take a little time to connect on what day-to-day problems are, but make sure that you're always keeping the main thing, and focusing on those goals. And we'll talk about goals in a minute. Prepare, 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 prepare. Not just the mentees, the mentors as well. One of the best practices that's been recommended to me, that I've in turn recommended to others, is this idea of making sure that as a mentor, I keep good notes. After each mentoring session, I write down, now I do it digitally, used to do it manually. I have a OneNote file with my mentee's name on it. What was my takeaway from that meeting? What were my impressions, and what is my mentee committing to do between here and there? Maybe my mentee has a big event coming up in their life. Maybe they just got engaged, or they're moving houses, or they have a big presentation. I'll usually make a note of that as well. And prior to our next session, I'll review it. It takes all of 5 minutes to write it and less than 5 minutes to review it, but it makes our sessions so much richer. So that kind of preparation is not just for the mentee, it's also for the mentor. Mentees, staying in communication with your mentor, even between the meetings. If there was a big event, or you tried something that you said you were going to try, a quick email or a text, whatever that best mode of communication is, can be really, really helpful. And don't be afraid to say what you're thinking if you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable, take the time to create that comfort. Speak up, because your mentor needs to know what you're thinking. And mentees and mentors, that's true for your mentors as well. And then follow the guidelines for agreements. They really anchor you. I can't tell you how many times, can't count them on both hands and both feet, that mentoring partners have come to me, either a mentor or a mentee, 3, 4, 5 months into the mentoring relationship, and said, it started to fizzle, or it's not working. And I say, have you revisited your agreements? And they will either say we didn't set the agreements, or no, we forgot about those agreements. And we're able to get the relationship back on track by revisiting their mentoring agreements. So let's look at some mentoring meeting best practices that you can use to create agreements with your mentoring partner. So we usually suggest, when we have, assuming a 12-month mentoring relationship, that mentoring pairs connect twice a month for the first 3 months to build that trust, start to create a connection, create rapport, and that they reassess that frequency after 3 months. Typically after 3 months, they'll decide to meet monthly, but sometimes they'll decide to keep that to twice a month, or sometimes they'll increase it to once a week for a short period, depending on what's happening in their lives. Schedule time to prepare in advance for your meeting. We talked about that already. Here's one, and it's really important when you're setting at the beginning of a mentoring relationship to agree on this with your mentoring partner. Create an agenda with some loose timelines. I know many mentoring partners who found a lot of success in setting a template agenda for each meeting. They decided that, for example, they want to spend 10 minutes of the hour connecting, and 10 minutes following up on whatever's happened in the day-to-day, and the rest on goal setting. And then they always have a takeaway at the end. Others have time for a power question at the beginning, which is a deep question, other than how are you, how is the weather, and how is your weekend, right? It's something deeper. What motivates you? What's your superpower? Where both really answer. And then time for the day-to-day, and then time for getting at goals. Peter, I see your question. Can you have a copy of the slides? We are going to be sending a link of the recording, which will have both the slides and the live session, that will be sent out to everybody who registered, including you, after the session. So it probably won't be sent out until tomorrow, but it will be sent to you as soon as possible. If that never comes, then please send me an email and I'll make sure you have that. Okay, set aside time for reconnecting before you address other topics. That's really, really important. It helps you avoid the relationship becoming transactional. Make sure you stick to that agenda during the meeting. And as part of your agreements, ask permission, give each other permission to use that agenda to keep yourselves on track, so it doesn't feel awkward. 20 minutes into connecting, when somebody says, wait a minute, we haven't even gotten to talking about our goals yet. Always have the next meeting date on your calendar. I cannot tell you, I cannot think of another factor that is as predictive of future success than having the next meeting date on your calendar before you leave. It may get rescheduled, it may get moved, but if you make a commitment to one another to always have the next date scheduled, you'll continue to have that momentum and avoid the fizzle. Here's the final best practice that I want to share with you at the moment, which is to close the meeting with a check-in. At the end of every meeting, reserve a few minutes to ask, how's this going for you? Are we meeting each other's expectations? Anything we need to be doing differently? That idea of ongoing feedback about the mentoring relationship will help create the sense of co-creation and elevate the sense of reciprocity, that each person is getting needs met as well. Okay, so let's just talk about agreements conversation. There really are 3 components to a conversation about agreements that you want to be having with your mentoring partner. Again, mentees, remember, you can initiate these conversations as well. And I want to say to you that if you're already well into your mentoring relationship, it's not too late to revisit agreements conversation as well. Here are the 3 components. What ground rules will help us be productive and keep moving forward? Ground rules. How often are we going to meet? Where are we going to meet? Who's going to set the agenda? What's the agenda going to look like? Confidentiality agreements. Even if you're not in the same organization, if you're not in the same company, if you're not in the same industry, make sure you talk about confidentiality. Very often people will say to me, can't we just have Vegas rules? What's Vegas rules for those who may not be familiar culturally? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So a Vegas rule in a mentoring relationship would be what happens in the mentoring relationship stays in the mentoring relationship. And to that I say, it's just not that simple. There will be times, particularly if you're in the same organization, where you will learn something that will impact your job, or you will learn something about someone with whom you work, or mentors. You may have an opportunity that comes up that you think your mentee would be great for, and you want to advocate for them outside of the mentoring relationship using some piece of knowledge that you have. So you want to talk ahead of time with your mentoring partner about what are you going to do about confidentiality? Okay, what triggers and the 3rd category is triggers and boundaries. Triggers are hot buttons. We used to call them hot buttons, but we realized that that term in and of itself is a hot button. So the term we use is triggers. Trigger, are there certain things that you know that irritate you that your mentoring partner ought to be aware of so that they don't step into it? Somebody is unmuted. Jamie, would you mind finding out who that is and putting them on mute? Thank you. So it might be something like being late, and what does being late look like? It might be something like, you know what, I'm open for emails and phone calls, but texts feel intrusive. That's a boundary issue as well. It might be something like the importance of preparation or communicating in between sessions. There's lots of things that could be triggers for you. So making sure to share those, because if you're not aware something is a trigger, you're a lot more likely to set it off. And the final part of this last category is boundaries. There's 2 kinds of boundaries conversation. One is boundaries in scope, and others are boundaries in time. So is there a boundary on what we're going to be talking about in this mentoring relationship? Do we want to separate the personal from the professional? Is that possible? Right? Do we want to be talking about one and not the other? Do we not want to talk about promotions, right? Do we, what do we want to, what are the boundaries on what it is you're going to be talking about? And the others are boundaries on time. So it might be something like, you know what, I work a 4-day week and I'm not going to be responsive to emails on Fridays because I have family obligations and I'm taking off. It might be, I don't like to be texted. I find that that's something I save from my family. So I prefer that you not communicate with me that way. There could be other things as well. So making sure that those are communicated ahead of time can be very helpful in getting your relationship on track and avoid resentment down the line. So having these as an explicit conversation can be very, very, very helpful. I want to shift from the setting agreements, the negotiation phase, to the enabling growth phase. The initial conversation about goals actually does happen in the negotiating phase, but the goal getting phase is in the enabling growth phase. That's the phase on the bottom. What we know is that mentors help mentees grow into the person who has the capability, the confidence, and the competence to establish their goals. So the importance of well-defined goals is really quite huge. Here's something we heard from a mentor who participated in one of the programs that we worked with. They said, we were not really clear about goals, despite the fact that we talked about it up front. We should have been more specific and concrete, and lack of doing that made our relationship kind of meandering process, and it wasn't as helpful as it could have been to each of us. This mentor realized that goals become the compass. Goals become the grounding and the compass for mentoring relationships to keep them on track, to be able to measure success. And so it's critical that you and your mentoring partner take the time to talk about the mentee's goals. Here's some advice from prior mentoring pairs about goals. Do some work to help you understand yourself. This will help in clarifying the goals. That's advice for mentees. Understand the kind of change you want in yourself. Put your brain's heart and your action into this. Here's one for both mentors and mentees. Make goal setting the center of the relationship. It helps to stay focused and to feel accomplishment. I've said last time that learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring. And this prior mentoring pair, their advice was to focus on the learning. Don't worry so much about being nice or diplomatic. Take the time to build the trust so you can really focus on learning. And mentors can help show you how to improve. Your direct supervisor can confirm the changes, but you can be motivated to do it because you will see changes. So what should a goal conversation look like? Well, a goal conversation really begins with what we call starter goals. Starter goals are goals that are general, goals that are categorical. I'll give you some examples of those in just a minute. And it's really where most people end, but it really, as its name suggests, is where most people should start. General categories of things you want to work on. The next category are smarter goals. I'll explain those in a little bit, but it's about getting to more specificity. And the final category we won't talk about quite as much today is sleeper goals. What's a sleeper goal? A sleeper goal is a goal that emerges on your way to achieving a smarter goal that you have to address in order to get to the smarter goal. So it might be if you say your SMART goal is around influencing, that by a certain amount of time, you want to be able to the mentee wants to be able to feel like they can influence in their organization, and that's going to be measured by the number of initiatives that they're able to get bought into or to launch in a particular quarter. The sleeper goal might be, they might realize along the way that they're not sure who the most influential people, who the decision makers in the organization are. And so a goal, it's a necessary goal in order to be able to have that influence that just emerges. So that's an example of a sleeper goal. But let's start with starter goals, because as I said, so often people stop at starter goals. They're not stopper goals, they're starter goals. General categories, right? Oh, I want to work on my strategic ability. I want to learn how to think in bigger picture. I want to delegate and be more productive, or I want to have more work-life balance. I want to build stronger staff relationships. I want to become a better listener. I want to be more innovative or work on team building. You can see how these are all worthy ends, but mushy and vague. But you got to have a place to start. And what's really significant is that that's part of the process. Is starting with starter goals really is part of the process. So pushing to SMART goals right away can be very counterproductive, because very often mentees aren't aware of what it is their goal that they want is. So you want to start off with a starter goal conversation. And here are 3 questions that can help you, mentees, get to your starter goals, help you, mentors, elicit those starter goals from your mentees. Where do you see yourself in 3 years? This slide used to say 5 years, and I'll tell you what, 5 years is an eternity if you're not sure where it is you want to go, and it can be an eternity regardless. Just look at the last 2 if you think I'm wrong, right? The world changes so much. So particularly for mentees who are more junior in their careers, asking a 3-year time horizon can be very, very helpful. Mentors, I encourage you, when you ask that question, push your mentees to think through some specificity. What are they doing? Not necessarily what their title is, although if they know that, that's helpful. What are they doing? What are they learning about? Who are they working with? What does a work day look like when they envision what they see for themselves in 3 years? Here's the next question. What are your strengths and challenges? You'll probably elicit and develop those more throughout the course of your relationship, but getting your thoughts out, mentees and mentors, helping your mentees sort through their thoughts on their strengths and challenges is incredibly useful. And finally, what skills and talents are you underutilizing? I'm a huge fan of the strengths-based approach of not just working on where your challenges are, but developing those strengths that you might be underutilizing. So these are great ways to get to starter goals. If you have this conversation with your mentee, you'll begin to get some of those categories that we saw of starter goals. Once you have the starter goals, you want to transform them into smarter goals. So many of you may have seen the acronym probably repeatedly: SMART, specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound. You may not have seen ER, exciting and risky. And this is not my intellectual property. It comes from Michael Hyatt, whom some of you may know. And I love it in the mentoring context because forming a goal that you can measure, very important, that is specific, very important, that you can take action on, of course, that's time bound. Sure, then you know when you're supposed to finish it. But a mentoring relationship is such a laboratory for those exciting goals, things that mentees will really be excited to work on, and something that feels just a little bit risky to push them out of their comfort zone. So how do you move a starter goal to a smarter goal? Here are a couple of examples that will help you see that process. A starter goal might be something like, I want to increase my influence. Smarter goal: by the end of the mentoring year, I want to be a respected decision maker by increasing my technical competence and enhancing my communication skills as measured by, right? You can see how that's not just longer, but it's also much more specific. Starter goal: build better relationship with my team members. How? Well, by the end of the mentoring year, I want to be able to strengthen my relationships and build my capacity to address conflicts directly as measured by ... So here's a formula, the OKR formula, objectives and key results. Again, you might have seen this as well. If you want a shorthand for developing smarter goals, use this formula. I will blank, here's my objective, as measured by blank, my key results. I will increase my influence as measured by my ability to get 3 initiatives launched in the next quarter, right? So here are some questions. I encourage you to take a screenshot if you want to save this, of questions to see if your goal is smarter enough. Will it be challenging and a stretch to achieve? Remember, this is the beauty of a mentoring relationship, is mentees stretch. Will the goal help you grow your leadership competencies? Will it require you to make a personal investment of your time, energy, and effort? Will it contribute to your growth and development? Will we both, mentor and mentee, feel a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction in achieving this goal? Okay, so let me pause here and just stop sharing for a moment and see what questions, comments come up for you. Anything related to goal setting, setting agreements, making the most of your mentoring relationship.
Is there an agreement you could share?
You mean a template agreement, Diane?
Yeah, yes, a template agreement, because I just love what you've said in the past webinars and this one about it's all about the agreement. And I feel like even though in our program we have one, I feel like it probably needs to be revised and, like you said, revisited so that the relationship doesn't meander.
Yeah, I definitely encourage mentoring partners to establish mentoring agreements. And we don't have a template as much as we have template questions. So, and I'm happy if you have, I'm not going to reach for it now because it's a little bit out of my reach. But if you have not gotten a copy of the Mentor's Guide, there's some great prompting questions there as well. But the idea is ground rules, confidentiality, hot buttons, and triggers. And in the book, you'll see some examples of that. But Diane, if you put your email in the chat, Jamie, and if you would capture that for me, I can send you some template questions for you that will help you create that formulation.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Yep. So Marlene has asked in the chat, when a mentoring session is a drive-by, do you have a suggestion for how to best adapt in this abbreviated form of mentoring? Yeah, it's a great question. So the best question in a drive-by situation is, what is it that you need from me in this moment? What is it you need from me in this moment? Because sometimes the drive-by situation is, hey, let me just run it by you. Sometimes the drive-by situation is, I just need to vent, get it off my chest and see if you're in support, right? But the other piece that can be really, really helpful is to say, what is your takeaway and your commitment as a result of this conversation? What is your takeaway and your commitment as a result of this conversation? So what do you need from me in this moment? And what is your takeaway and commitment? And how should we follow up with one another? Follow up on the takeaway and the commitment, right? You want to make sure that it's an action-oriented conversation. You want to make sure that what you're providing actually is some guidance that's transferable and hopefully the basis of an ongoing relationship. So what's your takeaway? And I would say mentors, you can share your takeaway. And if there's a commitment, you can make that too. By asking your mentee, what's your takeaway and your commitment, and how shall we follow up with one another? That allows that conversation to have some longevity. Marlene, I hope that helps. One topic we didn't talk about is the idea of feedback. We talked about feedback on the relationship itself, right? Asking what we should stop and start and continue doing and setting some time for a check-in at the end of each meeting. That's really helpful. But there's also this idea of mentoring relationship being a ground for being a laboratory and having feedback be ongoing and not this cataclysmic event. So often we hear like, can I give you some feedback? And we don't know whether to brace for a sucker punch or go grab a glass of wine to prepare for the conversation, right? But instead, if in mentoring, there's this sense of ongoing positive and negative feedback, then it just becomes part of the parlance, part of the expectation, and it takes out some of the sting. So making sure that there's time for feedback is something we didn't have full time to discuss today, but another point that I think really needs to be emphasized here as well. We have time for one more question, if there is one.
Hey, Lisa, this is Janet Cooper. And
Hi,
I would just say, I think this is critical. I think this is the one thing that my mentees have struggled with is how do I boil it down to something that's actionable? So very timely. We just finished our first year of mentoring program and we had some feedback sessions, and this was the one thing that was really what we could do better. So thank you very much.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining today. Okay, so please come next week with all your questions. Share your experiences. It's a chance for to have some mentoring wisdom in the room. You can join us for all or part, and we'll be here for a full hour at the same time in through noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. Thank you for joining. As I said, the link will be sent to you of the recording. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. My email is on the screen. Thank you all for joining. Happy Mentoring Month, and we'll see you next week.